Hi, everybody. So I've been watching a lot of speeches on YouTube, and I've been feeling kind of left out because, I have a number of different kinds of videos, but I haven't really given too many speeches on YouTube. So I have some material here, and here goes. There's a surfeit of great ideas in education. They are great ideas for various reasons. Children will learn a lot. They'll be really happy or enthusiastic. They'll have vivid memories of what they're taught, or they'll learn very efficiently. It is easy as an educator or a homeschooling parent to get excited about ideas for education. Heck, every good level appropriate book and every good experiment is a great idea. Yet there is such harsh disagreement over educational methods that debates could be called, the debates over education, especially in the political realm, could be called a war over educational reform. So why? There's a conundrum here that I'm trying to get at, but I'm not explaining it very well, so let me elaborate. So theorists have posited many different goals for education. The explicit purpose of progressive education is to socialize students by teaching them practical knowledge, how-to knowledge, and to do so as equally as possible. So there aren't any two great differences. Education is supposed to be the great equalizer. By contrast, at least somewhat, the purpose of liberal arts traditionalists like myself is something like developing the liberating potential of as much knowledge and wisdom and intellectual skill, like reading, writing, calculation, etc., as possible. Of course, as you can see in any number of laundry list goals for education, educators love to endorse all goals. They just, throw in everything. And if you ask them, they will say, of course we want your children to learn as much as they possibly can. What, do you think we're stupid or crazy or something? We're doing our best at teaching them, of course, using all the latest techniques. We're professionals. And this sounds very reasonable. It's difficult to contradict without sounding like a jerk. But here's the thing. As a critic of public schools and a supporter of liberal arts education, and especially rigorous liberal arts education, I don't need to contradict it. In fact, I believe all that. I believe the professional teachers completely. I think they do completely seriously, sincerely want our children to learn as much as they can. Of course they do. And of course they're doing their best, many of them anyway, with the latest techniques. And they're professionals, mostly. That's all true. The problem is not with their willingness to endorse the goals of a liberal arts education, or their intentions, or their professionalism. The problem is with overriding goals. Contemporary U.S. teachers want their students, above all, engaged, to be motivated and paying attention and excited, and in the interests of equal educational opportunity, to be following roughly the same curriculum as other kids in the same grades following the same standards. This too sounds reasonable, right? As far as it goes. It's so reasonable sounding, in fact, that it sounds radical or at least unreasonable to object very strongly to it. And therein lies the problem. On the surface, everybody agrees. If we're not thinking too hard, we can endorse a huge variety of educational tasks and methods and goals. But beneath the surface is this little thing called opportunity cost. This, of course, means basically what you're missing out on by doing this rather than taking another opportunity. So, for example, every time Mrs. Brown's third grade class puts on an exciting, interdisciplinary, highly educational drama project, it's a great idea. that occupies 2 hours of class time for 2 weeks in a row. She's choosing not to let her students read 20 easy picture books or a half a dozen easy chapter books, etc. Or another awesome idea, in my opinion. But that's only one example. There are many, many more throughout the educational landscape. The opportunity cost problem is about much more than individual tasks. It's really about the entire system. As I said, a core feature of educational systems that make Deweyan socialization an overriding goal is that all the kids have to follow roughly the same curriculum in the same grades. But this means that, for example, even if Jack read Tom Sawyer last summer, he will still have to reread it if the class is reading it, or maybe he'll just twiddle his thumbs, right? Or if Sarah is 2 years ahead of her peers in math because she loves math or because her parents are after-schooling her, maybe she'll be supported by her teachers and principal, but it's also very possible she'll be made to do the work that is 2 years behind her current skill level, suffering in boredom. So I've mentioned some examples of opportunity costs in education. Let me elaborate, and I think the overall concept is going to become very clear. Okay, my first example is Latin. And consider this. I know that talk of Latin sounds ridiculous in the 21st century to some people, but please hear me out. A very strong case can be made that getting several years' worth of Latin under one's belt produces a much better scholar. Latin improves English vocabulary and grammar. Something like 60% of the words in the dictionary come from Latin and Greek. Well, I also encourage the study of Greek. It teaches mental discipline and acuity for reasons I won't go into. It gives students an intimate familiarity with the roots of Western civilization, and in particular the origins of its core concepts, its intellectual and rhetorical traditions, and the works that originated many disciplines and written forms. So I might go on, but suffice it to say that setting time aside to learn Latin in some depth will make much better scholars out of many students. So if the goal is to foster academic skill, learning the classical languages is among the very best of ideas. But, of course, there is virtually no chance that public schools would, in any great numbers and any time soon, introduce Latin except as a high school elective, maybe, mostly for honors students, right? I suggest two reasons. So first, Latin is a dead language and has no obvious practical applications. So it runs counter to the Deweyan emphasis on practical knowledge, on know-how. Second, it is too difficult for many ill-prepared students who already struggle with more difficult technical subjects like math and hard science, grammar. So it runs counter to the goal of equalization. So we could teach our children, or at least some of them, Latin when they're ready for it. It might be difficult, but it's also extremely efficient to do so. But it won't happen because progressive educational goals make the suggestion completely untenable. So here's a second example. One educational practice I love to hate is the use of Basal reader systems. You know, that series of language arts textbooks you suffered through from the first grade through the 5th or 6th grade. So these are written with the very best of intentions, I'm sure, and they look impressive. Crack them open and you'll find for example, a first grade explanation of what a noun is, a third grade reading selection that seems perfectly reasonable, and interesting for that grade, or a set of challenging fifth grade vocabulary words and various explanations of the conventions of poetry and drama. It all seems like meaty, necessary, excellent topics for study. So what's not to like about these basal readers? Well, when a child emerges from the careful study over 6 years of such systems, do they end up knowing all about those things? Not very often. So suppose instead that you were to take the same 10 hours per week spent on language arts and instead do just two things. Read books chosen by the students themselves, perhaps from a list. I recommend lots of classics. And write daily on topics of student choice with some specific assignments mixed in. This is essentially what I've done with my son, age 7, since he was 5. As a result, he is now reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, a children's book. It is a children's book, in my opinion, usually assigned to high school students. And he's been writing things like the following composition, randomly selected, that I was rather surprised to find in his writing folder, which I am going to sort of read out for you here very quickly. So here we go. So begin long quote of my son's composition called Grammar. An adjective is a describing word. Here are some examples. Thin, tall, short, long, wavy, soft. These words can be used to describe a great many things. Now, there is something special about adjectives. They come in 3 forms, which are called positive, comparative, and superlative. Here are some examples. And then he gives this table, positive, comparative, superlative, and then he gives examples on each column, quick, quicker, quickest, speed, speedier, speediest, and so forth. Okay. In advertisements, superlative adjectives are used to exaggerate the quality of things that are on sale. Books, toys, video games, or even rides. Rides aren't for sale. Or circuses. They aren't for sale either. Rides and circuses just cost money to ride or look at. Here are some examples of words they use. Biggest, greatest, fastest, cheapest. Nouns are words that mean a person, place, or thing. Here are some examples. Library, Jane, John, garbage dump, house. Nouns are very important too. Without them, you wouldn't even be able to say your name, because all names are nouns. Verbs describe action, possession, or existence. Here are some examples. Throw, catch, mine, yours, his, hers. Yeah, so it isn't perfect. Conjunctions are used to connect strings of words and make sentences make sense. What sentence is really a sentence if it doesn't have a conjunction like, for example, and? So, end of long quote. So I was surprised to find this composition in my 2nd grade son's writing folder, I say, because I didn't assign it. And in fact, I don't think he ever even showed it to me. He obviously didn't think it was particularly remarkable. As you can see, he was correctly using and explaining some pretty advanced words in excellent grammatical sentences with flawless spelling, although his examples of verbs did contain a few howlers. My point is that after we assigned an hour of reading many classics and other high-quality books, while assigning 30 to 60 minutes per day for daily writing, mostly on topics of his own choice, and an occasional grammar assignment thrown in. Our son's abilities in reading and writing have blossomed, clearly, and he has quite naturally picked up everything taught in the basal readers, at least up through the 2nd grade, that's for sure, and more. We could slog through basal readers and grammar workbooks and do long, regular, boring spelling and vocabulary tests and all that stuff. But it would be a comparative waste of time, wouldn't it? Instead, he spends a substantial amount of time reading excellent books. I mean, really excellent books, and writing a lot. The result is a far better and more efficient method of learning language arts than school language arts programs provide. His intuitive grasp of grammar, punctuation, vocabulary, and spelling results from extensive reading and daily practice writing hundreds of words. He does grammar study from time to time, albeit not from workbooks that in the early grades teach students what proper English is. Our son already knows that from copious reading. Instead, he studies the fundamentals systematically as older grammar students do. Okay, so that's another example of a trade-off where instead of using this system of apparently excellent Basal readers, we're just using books and random, mostly self-selected reading assignments. And I think we're getting better results. So here is example number 3. Tracking. The equalization goal of education entails that we teach the same level of math to most students, that we don't let them work at their own pace, and that we don't tailor our textbook choices to them individually. If our overriding goal were to teach our students as much math as possible and as well as possible, then we would toss grade levels and track students by ability in a very, very fine-grained way, too. Not just, 3 tracks. I'm talking about each student would be on his own track. As soon as a student passes a test on some material with a 90% grade, for example, then that particular student moves on to the next level. Meta-analysis, and you can go to my blog and find the link to a news report that sort of discusses this, reportedly shows that ability grouping works wonders, which, to my mind, makes sense. Kids finish stuff at different speeds. Grade level tracking, especially in subjects like math, ensures that smarter kids will spend much time in class bored, while slower students will constantly be playing catch-up, naturally getting discouraged and not getting the help that they need. Consider this. Homeschooling parents tailor textbook choices to their children, of course, who are not forced to complete exactly one grade level in exactly 1 year. Of course, they don't have to do that. They can go faster, they can go slower. And just look at the average math scores of homeschoolers who are naturally tracked by ability in each subject, 84th percentile on average in math. One guess as to why ability grouping is so rarely tried. So as an NEA page explains, ability grouping discourages, or this is what they say, it discourages more poorly performing students. Never mind that those students benefit from extra time and help where it is really needed. Are they really much more discouraged than in classrooms where they're constantly trailing their age peers rather than doing as well as others in the room? Grade level tracking might support the overriding progressivist educational goal of equalization, but the opportunity cost is students that are learning less and less well than they do when forced to learn all at the same time. My point here is that the quote-unquote war over educational reform is not about whether various practices are good ideas and whether various goals are worthwhile. In education, ideas and goals are abundant and they're easy to endorse. The war instead is ultimately about the enormous burden in terms of opportunity cost that contemporary educational practices place on the student. If you think education should be about knowledge, wisdom, and academic skills, the situation is appalling to my mind. The bottom line for me is that the total opportunity cost associated with the overriding progressivist goals for public schooling, and this would apply to a lot of charter schools and private schools, means that most of our students are simply not learning nearly as much as they could be. We could see to it, if we were committed first and foremost to teaching and not just entertaining students, if we wanted to help each student achieve his or her best potential and not just equalize them, if we chose the most efficient methods for making learning happen, then we could see to it that all of our students would learn far more than they are now. Not just the ones at the top, but all of them. Someday I think we'll look back at this period from the 1920s or so until the early 2000s as sort of a dark age of education. I just hope that real change comes sooner rather than later. Okay, folks, that's it. So, let me know what you think.